Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we've got a 9-game Major League Baseball slate on DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? Also, shout out to some new members, Kevin, Glenn Allen, and Brian. Thank you guys for joining YouTube members. Make sure to check that out in the link in the description below. You'll get the write-ups every day and stuff for all the sports stuff I do, which mostly right now is baseball. But I will be adding some other stuff when I can, when it comes to NASCAR and when basketball gets going as well. So, also doing some WNBA stuff occasionally. So, with that said, let's get into the slate though. We're going to start with Ohtani at pitcher. Now, Ohtani, you do know what you're getting with him. He's pricey. He has had some bad games, but he's also getting a lot of strikeouts and can pitch as good as anybody. He has really nice upside. You got to ignore the fantasy points per game on DraftKings because they're including all the games that he plays, and it doesn't actually count those in the fantasy points thing. It's weird how they do it here. But anyway, Ohtani is a great option on the slate. He is facing San Francisco, and I do like a couple bets there, but they are high risk, high reward, as their team has some potential here. If Ohtani has a rough day, then San Francisco could be a team that's to be a very contrarian stack, and so I'm going to include some San Francisco players in my write-up, but I want to preface that is you only want to use them if you think Ohtani is going to do bad. Then we're going to look at Kevin Gausman for Toronto. He is facing Cleveland today, and he's had 4 games under 17 fantasy points all season long. He's been really solid. That gives him a nice floor and a really good plus matchup here against Cleveland. Though Cleveland doesn't strike out a ton, he does have a decent strikeout rate most of the time, and he's a viable option on the slate, especially just as a solid guy that can score you over 20 fantasy points, which is what we really like today. Then we'll look at Max Fried for Atlanta. In his first start back, he was dominant. He's pitched 6 games, 4 were shutouts, in 5 or 6 innings. In 5 or 6 innings, excuse me. So, 2 of the games of those last 6 of the 6 this season have not been great. But the matchup here is really solid against Pittsburgh, and he looks like he's feeling pretty good. His pitch count should be in the 70s and 80s today, I would expect, and he looks like he's in a really solid spot and looks like he'll have a good game. Then we'll look at Kelly for Arizona. Now, he is extremely high risk as he's facing the Dodgers. He's very contrarian today in a tough matchup. Unlike the guys more expensive than him, who are in easy matchups, he's worth a look, though, because he's had a really solid upside games lately. I really think his K rate has been inconsistent, but he does have good potential today, though the right-handed hitters do have some upside in this matchup. But he's a good way to win a GPP if he actually pays off. Though he's super high risk, he's squarely a contrarian play for GPPs. So then we'll look at Darvish for San Diego. I mean, it's been really hard to get Darvish right this season. He's had a lot of really good 30 fantasy point games, but then he also has just tons of duds. He's had 3 over 27 fantasy points in the last 5, though, but he does have a tendency to give up a lot of earned runs in his bad games, and it seems like his K rate somewhat inverts with his earned runs given up. So if he's playing shutout baseball, he gets a lot of strikeouts. When he doesn't, he just doesn't get any. So we'll have to, he's very hard to figure out, but he definitely draws an interesting matchup here against Seattle, though Seattle's been kind of hot lately. Then we're going to look at Bobby Miller for the Dodgers. He is facing Arizona today, and getting a win here would also help. I suspect a 12 to 18 fantasy point game is in his future here, which is a little bit pricey for that, but he is in range barely, so he is viable on the slate. Then we'll look at Pivetta for Boston, who has really been interesting recently. He's had some pretty good games. His floor is typically not super high, but he's managing to have some good games where he gets a bunch of strikeouts. But those are inconsistent, so do keep that in mind. But an 18 to 24 fantasy point range game is actually pretty possible here. Though I am going to preface, much like I did with Ohtani, Kansas City has a lot of very cheap plays that have some high upside, is because a bunch of these guys are young and they're just playing in the majors for the first time, or for the first only been in the majors for 10 or so games, and they have a lot of interesting upside. And he is a pitcher that can sometimes have really bad games, and he does tend to give up some home runs as well. So he is in play, but he's high risk as a result of the matchup being kind of strange. And then finally, Hancock for Seattle. Now, I don't typically look at 4,000 guys too much as options. However, he is a Hail Mary play. He's had a 1.44 ERA in the last 4 starts in the minors with 26 strikeouts in the last 25 innings. That's 4 games. He's had a 4.32 ERA over the season, though, in 98 innings this season. He's also had 107 strikeouts in that stretch, which isn't quite as good, but he's also just $4,000. And if he can replicate anything that he's done recently in the majors, then he'll definitely have some potential to pay off here. And this will be his first start, so it'll be interesting to see how he does. He is facing a decently tough team, but Seattle can be very inconsistent. And I really didn't like the Seattle bats all that much today, despite the fact that they're facing a young pitcher. So he definitely has some viability, but clearly a Hail Mary play at his $4,000 price range. I am going to do one lineup with him in it just to see what can happen, but I don't think that that's necessarily the greatest option. But at any rate, he's available. Moving in our catchers here, let's get into this part now. So we're going to start with Will Smith for the Dodgers. He has been really inconsistent lately. His batting average has dropped off, but he still managed to score a lot of fantasy points in a lot of games, which is impressive, despite the fact he's not having a high batting average. He's striking out a little bit too much sometimes, but he does have good home run upside as well, and he does draw that metric here, so he's a decent play on the slate. Salvador Perez looks really interesting for Kansas City. If you want to go with the Kansas City stack, he's definitely the guy that I would start it with, as he's hit the ball pretty well recently. He does have some home run upside in this matchup, as the metrics are really good for it, though it is a little bit risky because Pivetta has been decent recently. You can also consider Adley Rutschman, William Contreras, Alejandro Kirk, Yanier Diaz, and Freddie Furman as well. And I do like Furman a lot as from that cheap option too. So then we'll go to first base and look at Freddie Freeman. He could do a Freeman Furman thing. He's hitting the ball extremely well this recently. He's had 2 home runs the last 10 games. He's hitting 476. He has all sorts of upside. He's scoring fantasy points in just a whole bunch of different ways, even getting stolen bases. So I really like his upside. And with Acuna being kind of gimpy likely today, he's definitely a guy to pay up for as a good option at first base. Matt Olson is also hitting the ball very well for Atlanta. He's hitting 382 and with 6 home runs over the last 10 games. He's had 2 games in a row without a home run, but he still managed to score fantasy points a lot, and that gives him a nice upside, though he does need to score over 10 today at this price range. Lamont Wade Jr. is a guy that if you want to go up against Ohtani, he's a way to do it. He's probably the best option on the Giants today, as he draws good metrics for this game, though he is facing Ohtani, so you got to take that with a grain of salt. And then a value play that's whoops, sorry, Darren. I had the wrong guy there. I got to move to second base. Sorry about that, guys. With Mookie Betts, who's just absolutely crushing the ball, averaging 14.5 fantasy points a game over the last 10, including 4 home runs. He's had a bunch of games in a row over 15 fantasy points. He's been hitting the ball very well. I like his upside, home run potential, and everything else. He's a great play as well. However, Altuve is also a great play. Who I do think is a core play today for Houston. He's hit the ball very well, 350 batting average over the last 10. He's getting stolen bases, getting home runs. He's just doing a little bit of everything. He's also not got the same wear and tear that Mookie has on the season so far, and so he's really hitting the ball great as of late. Ozzie Albies is also hitting the ball very solidly. He's got some home run upside in this matchup here against Pittsburgh at 2. I do think that Priester is likely to give up some home runs to the Braves today, and he's definitely a guy that I think has a good potential to do so. Justin Turner is also in play, though he's been kind of gimpy recently. You want to make sure he does play today, which he may or may not, but we'll have to find out if he's in the lineup. But if he does play, he'll be in a situation, though. He's a little bit expensive. Merrifield for Toronto has been pretty interesting recently, as his home run upside has been pretty solid. He's had 2 home runs the last 10 games. He is managing to have some multi-hit games, which has given him some upside, though he's been a little bit inconsistent throughout the year. And then I got a Hail Mary kind of play here for Samad Taylor for Kansas City. Sorry if I'm butchering your first name. But he's only played 10 games, but he's actually been hitting the ball pretty well. He also has stolen base potential, which is nice. He's had a few really big games, especially with the stolen bases added. He's not got a huge amount of home run upside, but the stolen bases are definitely something he can do if he can get on base. And this is definitely a situation where that's capable, as Pivetta is not a great pitcher a lot of times. And with a very young team, he definitely has some potential here to do something. But he is a Hail Mary play. Maybe in third base, we'll look at Devers for Boston. Now, he really looks solid today in the metrics, though he's been inconsistent this year. He's hitting right out his average right now. He's been up and down, but he had a streak where he was really big, but now he's pretty much leveled off, so he's having some big games occasionally. he's definitely capable of it today, but you can't guarantee that he's going to do it as he's been really inconsistent. Gunnar Henderson also in play today. He's a little bit pricey for what he's doing, though. He has had 3 home runs the last 10 games, and he's hitting the ball better than he has most of the season. But he does tend to be pretty streaky, and so he's a good play, but he's a little bit of a concern. Alex Bregman is a little bit overpriced today as he's not hit the ball well recently, but he does draw good metrics, and he still manages to score some fantasy points a lot of games. He's just been striking out more, which has been. I wish his price would come down some to make it a little bit easier to roster him. Matt Chapman, though, for Toronto, has hit the ball inconsistent throughout the season. He started the season with a bang. His home run potential today, though, is really solid, so he's very interesting on this particular slate. But he is a little bit risky due to his price. And then Miguel Garcia, Miguel Garcia. Sorry if I'm butchering your name a little bit. He has absolutely been hitting the ball well with over a 300 average over the last 10 games. He's also getting stolen bases, which I really like to take advantage of. He's also had a nice little hit streak here. He's had, I think, 14 games about with a hit, and he's had a couple multi-hit games. He does strike out some, but not as much as some of the other guys. And he's like 2 games he had 3 strikeouts. He still managed to score good fantasy points in those games, and he's cheap enough that he's definitely viable on the slate, no matter who you use at pitcher. Maybe in the shortstops, we're going to look at Bobby Witt Jr. for Kansas City as well. He's another guy that I would definitely roster if you go with a Kansas City stack, as he's hitting the ball extremely good with a 442 batting average. He's also more capable to roster because you could put in Taylor and Garcia or Furman and really help you pay up for him. He's just hitting the ball very good. He's had a ton of RBIs. He's also getting stolen bases and home runs. He's doing a little bit of everything. His batting average isn't quite as good as some of the other guys throughout the season, but he's hitting well right now, and that's when I like to use guys. Bo Bichette for Toronto is in play if he plays today. He has been back. He looks like he's back to go, good to go, but let's just wait and see to make sure he does play today. But if he does, before his injuries, he was hitting the ball extremely well. I do like his potential today, though he is fairly expensive for coming back from a knee injury. Then we'll look at Lindor for the Mets, who's also hit the ball really well lately. 432 batting average over the last 10 games. He is hard to roster his price, but he's definitely viable with his home runs. He has good potential today as well, and he's had a lot of really good games in a row, especially multi-hit games. Then we'll look at Gunnar Henderson can play here at the shortstop as well. Dansby Swanson can also play here for the Cubs. Now, he's been inconsistent, but he's hitting home runs. He's kind of a boom or bust play, but he's a little bit expensive for that, but he still has that potential, so he's viable. And then for a super value Hail Mary option for Kansas City is Lofton. He is very cheap at $2,000. This will be his first game. He has done okay. He's the 7th. He's ranked the number 7 player in their minor league system, their prospects. He has an interesting potential, kind of a decent stolen base guy occasionally, but not like a great one. But he's hitting about 270 over this season, so he has some potential here. But he is high risk, but he's also just $2,000, and kind of a way you could just throw some minimum price play to get in to pay up somewhere else. But he is high risk, so he is very expressively a Hail Mary play. Moving into our outfielders, we're going to look at Acuna. Now, Acuna is day-to-day. He may or may not play today. I suspect that they might sit him just to give him a day off because he got hit in the elbow yesterday on a pitch. But he does draw some great metrics if he does play, so we'll have to wait and see on him. After him, we have Yordan Alvarez for Houston, who's hit the ball very well with 4 home runs the last 10 games. He has really nice upside, and I do think he's a great option on the slate. Aaron Judge is also a core play for me today. He hit a home run yesterday. It looks like he's back to hitting the ball well, and hopefully he can start swinging some home runs and be a really good payoff, though he does need one to pay off at this price range. He's definitely viable on the slate. Kyle Tucker also in play for Houston, though he's been a lot more inconsistent than Alvarez has been recently. He's a little bit cheaper than Alvarez, and he does draw good metrics for this game. Then we'll look at Corbin Carroll for Arizona. Now, he has been really bad recently in a bit of a slump, but he's had some hits in the last few games, and he's managed to score some fantasy points, though he does need to do a little bit better than what he's done the last few games, but it looks like he may be breaking out of a slump. Yoshida for Boston also in play today. He's been a little bit inconsistent recently, but he's still getting on base and scoring some fantasy points. But it's been a little while since he's had a home run, and he is kind of due. He has the potential as well in this matchup, especially. Then we'll look at Jarren Duran for Boston. He's also hit the ball pretty decently recently. He does draw some home run upside in this matchup. He's got some good potential if he draws the start. George Springer is a little bit under the radar today, but he does draw really good metrics for this game. Excuse me. Also like his home run upside, despite the fact that he's only had one home run in the last 10 games. He has really good potential for today. Michael Brantley could have his first game of the season today. If that is the case, he'll have some interesting upside here. Obviously, could be his first game of the year if he does play, so he is a little bit risky, but he definitely has some potential. Verdugo for Boston also hitting the ball really well with a 3.13 average over the last 10 games, so he's not scoring a ton of fantasy points in most of those, but he does draw some upside in this matchup, so I do think he's viable. And then finally, Michael Harris. He's a core play for me. He has hit the ball really well, 382 batting average, and with Acuna out, he's going to have to try to lift some of the offense today if Acuna does end up being out, and he'll have some interesting metrics for this game, a really good home run upside and stolen base potential. You could also look at Conforto, Yaz, and Jock Peterson for San Francisco if you want to go with the San Francisco stack. Other sub 3,000 guys you could look at Darian Blanco for Kansas City, David Villar for San Francisco, and Jake McCarthy for Arizona across different positions. So let's go ahead and get into our FanDuel real quick, and we're going to look at our pitchers. Ohtani, Gausman, and Fried are all the most expensive options. I would rank them Gausman, Fried, and then Ohtani based on their matchups and stuff like that. And if you want to go cheaper at the pitching position, Miller or Pivetta for the Dodgers and Boston respectively have the most upside at the sub $9,000 price range. Though I do think it's probably wise to pay up for one of the top three big guys on this particular slate. Looking at our catchers and first baseman, we have two expensive guys in Freddie Freeman and Matt Olson, who obviously hit the ball extremely well lately, and they draw great metrics. But if you go against Ohtani, then Lamont Wade Jr. is nice and cheap and definitely playable. You could pay mid-range options for Vlad Jr. and Pete Alonso, which are actually a little bit cheaper on FanDuel, which give them some potential, unlike on DraftKings, where they're very expensive and hard to roster. Freddie Furman is also in play at Kansas City, as he's nice and cheap at catcher and has some potential. You could also look at Salvador Perez as well. Then we'll look at second base, and Altuve and Albies. There's a little bit expensive there, but they are both viable. Albies, I think, has a lot of home run upside. In fact, I think he's my home run call for today. But he is hard to roster on DraftKings, but a little bit easier on FanDuel. As for the other options, Ketel Marte is actually a little bit underpriced on Arizona for his potential. Whit Merrifield has been hitting the ball pretty inconsistent, but well, and has some nice upside in this matchup. And then Brandon Lowe is actually a little bit cheaper than I expected him to be. And then Samad Taylor is kind of a Hail Mary play at this position, who's dirt cheap. Maybe at third base, we'll look at Rafael Devers, who's fairly priced here on FanDuel and draws really good metrics here, though he is inconsistent. Gunnar Henderson also in play there at a cheap price. Matt Chapman, Alex Bregman, and Miguel Garcia are all very cheap and viable on this slate. I definitely think it's wise potentially to put a third baseman who at the utility spot as well, because they're just nice and good price range guys, and they're all hitting the ball pretty well. At the shortstop options, we do have Bobby Witt Jr. and Francisco Lindor being the more expensive options. They're both viable, and they've hit the ball pretty well lately. Dansby Swanson also in play for Chicago, and he's actually a little bit cheaper here than I expected him to be, so he's definitely in play. Brandon Crawford is cheap enough to be in play on FanDuel if you go against Ohtani, and so is Tommy Edman, who's a little bit underpriced on FanDuel for his potential here. And then we'll look at our outfielders. Acuna and Judge and Alvarez and Tucker are all expensive but viable on this slate if they do draw the start. Judge is actually a little bit underpriced, which is hard to believe for a guy that's $4,000 on FanDuel. But Kyle Tucker also in play for Houston. Here he is viable on this one, though he hasn't been hitting the ball as well as Alvarez. Yoshida and Duran are both cheap plays for Boston, and I think Duran is probably a little bit better than Yoshida today, but he is priced about the same. George Springer, also very underpriced on FanDuel, so he's definitely a guy that I'm going to try to roster. Same, Glencario Stanton is in play, though he is a boomer bust home run call. He tends to be a home run or bust. And then Michael Harris is a little bit underpriced on FanDuel as well, and definitely viable on the slate. So with that said, guys, you could also look at Jock Peterson and Conforto for San Francisco as viable options if you want to go against Ohtani. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day, guys.